My name is Barbara, and I am 30 years old. That Sunday evening, I was just about to go to my parents for dinner when I received a message from my lawyer. Call me urgently. I dialed his number and couldn't believe my ears as I listened to what he was telling me. The people I trusted most in the world, my own parents, were suspected of major financial fraud. I looked at the envelope on the table, which contained a check for $45,000. It was my contribution to their business. Another half an hour, and that money would have disappeared forever, along with all my illusions. I collapsed onto the sofa, and the room swam before my eyes. Betrayal. Again. Just 6 months ago, I had returned to Charleston to start a new life after my divorce. 8 years of marriage ended in a cliché. My ex-husband, Mark, left me for his 22-year-old assistant. The divorce devastated me emotionally, but fortunately, he was fair in financial matters. This allowed me to buy a small townhouse in the city center and get a good position as a marketing director. I was 30, and starting everything from scratch was not easy. But I knew I could lean on my parents. It was their proximity and promised support that were the main reasons for my return home. My parents, Helen and David, were pillars of society in Charleston. My father had earned a reputation as a reliable financial consultant who helped families in our city save for their children's education and secure their retirement. His office was hung with certificates and letters of gratitude. My mother, no less respected in the city, was a leading agent for luxury real estate and was actively involved in several charitable organizations. They had created a flawless reputation for themselves, always in church on Sundays, always friendly with the neighbors. And they seemed very proud of me, their daughter, the marketing director. When Mark left me, they surrounded me with care. Mom moved in with me for a couple of weeks, cooked my favorite meals, and helped me pack the boxes into which I was putting my past, 8-year life. My father took over all the difficult conversations with banks, insurance, and credit companies. My parents became the very support that kept me from falling completely. In the end, family is what matters, Dad would say, hugging me as I cried over old photographs. We will always be there for you, Barbara. Mr. Hayes, the lawyer recommended to me by an old friend, appeared in my life at that very moment. He was a professional to the core, efficient, direct, and surprisingly empathetic. He guided me through all the legal jungles, protecting my interests every step of the way. After the divorce was finalized, I asked him to help me with the purchase of a new house as well. He proved to be indispensable, finding small details in contracts that I would have never noticed and securing better terms for me. Over time, our professional relationship grew into a friendship, and we sometimes met for coffee to discuss my financial future. 2 months ago, my parents invited me to dinner to share what they called terrific news. Over dessert, they presented me with their grand new project, a network of exclusive vacation villas on Hilton Head Island. With sparkling eyes, Mom laid out a glossy brochure on the table with professional photographs of gorgeous ocean view homes. We've been planning this for years, she said enthusiastically. The demand for this kind of vacation is just incredible. We're already booked up for 6 months in advance. Dad, in turn, opened a presentation on his laptop with graphs and profit forecasts. We're offering this opportunity only to our closest, he said, pointing to the impressive figures. Those who join the project now will receive the maximum income in the first 5 years. This is a unique chance, Barbara. They offered me to invest a part of the money I received after the divorce, that very $45,000, into their project. The idea seemed brilliant to me. I was just trying to rebuild my life, and this was a wonderful opportunity to secure additional income and financial stability for the future. Besides, it was a family business, which meant I could completely trust my parents. Think about it, Mom said, squeezing my hand. This could be your new beginning. In the following weeks, they let me in on the details. Their company had a beautiful name, Island Sanctuary Properties. They even introduced me via video call to their manager, Mr. Peterson. The connection was terrible, and I could barely see his face, but every conversation with my parents only strengthened my confidence in their business acumen. Tonight was supposed to be the culmination. Dinner at their house, signing the documents, and my official entry into the family business. The check was in my purse. My investment in my new, bright future. And this is what I learned from Mr. Hayes. Barbara, I accidentally stumbled upon something disturbing while checking information on another case, he explained when I called him back. Your parents' names came up in several lawsuits in 3 different counties of our state. I decided to check and discovered a whole scheme that has been going on for many years, different company names, but the essence is always the same. Everything inside me went cold, but he continued. Charges have been brought against them for creating pyramid schemes and misappropriating investors' money. The latest lawsuit was filed last month. The victim is a retired schoolteacher who invested all her savings in their guaranteed profitable project. That can't be true, I exclaimed. My parents are respected people. My father has been managing other people's money for decades. That's exactly how they gain trust, Mr. Hayes replied softly. According to court records, they repeatedly settled cases out of court and then just changed the firm's name. Barbara, there are a lot of inconsistencies in their financial history. And one more thing, he added. Those houses on Hilton Head that they showed you. I checked the registry. They don't own them. My world collapsed. My parents, who taught me to be honest and decent, couldn't be fraudsters. It was unthinkable. Your dinner tonight, Mr. Hayes continued, it's related to this investment, isn't it? Yes, I whispered, remembering the check in my purse. 45,000. Don't sign anything, he said firmly. Don't give them a cent. I need to check something else. But, Barbara, I have every reason to believe that they are planning to disappear with the investors' money very soon. After hanging up, I remained sitting on the sofa. His words echoed in my head. How could this be true? My parents, who always taught me that honesty is the most important thing, who made me return extra change at the store, and suddenly they were swindlers? While we were talking, Mr. Hayes sent me several court documents by email. With trembling hands, I opened them. Lawsuits from Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina. And in each of them, the defendants were listed as Helen and David Reed, my parents. I read and couldn't believe my eyes. One complaint described how they persuaded an elderly couple to invest all their money in a non-existent restaurant business. Another, how they collected money from an exclusive group of investors for the construction of a luxury residential complex that was never built. But the most terrible thing was the names of the plaintiffs. The Millers, our former neighbors who suddenly moved away when I was still in school. The Evanses, close family friends with whom my parents suddenly stopped communicating for some reason. Mrs. Davis, my former teacher. All these people who had disappeared from our lives under mysterious circumstances. At that moment, all the little oddities and unspoken things from my past came together into one terrifying picture. And then I remembered our moves. During my childhood, we changed our place of residence 4 times. Each time it was sudden, in the middle of the school year. My parents explained it as new opportunities. Now I understood that it was actually an escape. I remembered how secretive their work had always been. As soon as I brought a friend home, all talk of money would immediately cease. The door to my father's office was always locked. And Mom would answer any questions about her business with vague phrases about client confidentiality. They didn't approve of my close friends, constantly repeating that family is the most important thing. Friends can betray you, but blood never will, Mom would say. The most telling case was with Ryan, my college boyfriend. He was studying finance and once tried to ask my father a few professional questions, hoping for advice. Father reacted with inexplicable hostility. Their dislike for Ryan grew with each passing day until we eventually broke up. At the time, I thought they were just being overly protective of me. Now I understood, they were afraid he was too smart and would see right through them. Despite Mr. Hayes's warnings, I still went to the dinner. I needed to see them with my own eyes, now that I knew the truth. I wasn't going to expose them. I was going to observe. As I drove up to their house, I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. A new shiny Lexus in the driveway. An expensive watch on Mom's wrist that I had never seen before. An antique chest of drawers in the living room, which had replaced the old one I had known since childhood. "Barbara, sweetie." Mom greeted me at the door, enveloping me in a cloud of expensive perfume. "We've been waiting for you. What an exciting evening for our family, isn't it?" Dad also came to hug me, and I noticed new expensive cufflinks on his shirt. "This is the beginning of a wonderful partnership," he said, leading me into the living room, where appetizers were already set out and glasses of champagne stood ready. At first glance, everything was as usual. But looking closer, I began to notice strange details. Dad's phone was constantly vibrating, and he kept stepping out onto the porch to whisper to someone. And Mom, while pouring champagne, repeated several times that, "We need to get the papers sorted out before dinner, so we're not distracted later." "All the documents are ready," she said, pointing to a folder lying on the coffee table. "Just a couple of signatures, and you'll become a full partner in Island Sanctuary Properties." I took the folder and opened it. On the title page, besides my parents' names, were 3 other partners I had never heard of: Michael Vance, Laura Chen, and David Sterling. "And who are these people?" I asked as casually as possible. "Oh, those are just legal formalities, for tax optimization," Dad answered too quickly. "You have nothing to worry about." Mom immediately poured me more champagne. "The main thing is that your investment is securely protected by real estate. You'll receive your first profit in the next quarter." Their story began to fall apart. A week ago, they were talking about 4 new properties. Today, there were already 6. The profit promised in 6 months was now supposed to come almost immediately. I also noticed that the office address in the documents had changed from one end of Hilton Head to the other. "Let's sign already, before dinner gets cold," Mom said insistently, handing me an expensive fountain pen. "The notary charged us extra for a Sunday call-out, let's not waste time." This pressure, combined with all the other inconsistencies, confirmed my worst fears. Something was very, very wrong here. Apologizing, I went to the restroom. Walking down the hallway, I saw my father's briefcase slightly ajar. Inside were airline tickets. One way. To Panama City. Departure in 3 days. My heart was pounding wildly as I returned to the living room. They sat waiting, with expectant smiles on their faces. Waiting for me to sign the contract that would deprive me of all my savings and, much worse, destroy the one thing I had always believed in, my family. "Before I sign anything, I'd like to take a look at those updated forecasts you mentioned," I said with a polite smile, desperately trying to buy time. The $45,000 check lay in my purse, and I had no intention of taking it out. Mom became noticeably nervous. "Let's deal with the documents first, sweetie. The main thing is to reserve your spot while the opportunity is still there. Honestly, daughter, if you need more time to think, we can't wait," Dad added in an unusually sharp tone. "We have 3 other investors in mind. The Wilsons called just yesterday, begging for a chance to increase their contribution. Their pushiness was so obvious that any remaining doubts, if I had any, evaporated." "Excuse me," I said, glancing at my phone. An urgent call from work. I quickly left the room and headed to my father's office. Usually, his door was always locked, but today, for some reason, it was ajar. Inside, everything looked impeccable: leather folders, perfect order. But my gaze immediately fell on the corkboard on the wall. It was covered with brochures and clippings about Belize, Panama, and Argentina, countries that have no extradition treaty with the U.S. With trembling hands, I opened his desk drawer. A folder labeled ISP, Investors. Inside were tables with names, amounts, dates. The total amount exceeded $3 million. And I knew many of these people: family friends, elderly neighbors, members of our church. All those who had unconditionally trusted my parents. In another drawer, I found a small metal box. Locked. The key, as always, was under the desk mat. Inside were 4 passports. 2 with my parents' photos, but with the names Richard and Catherine Sterling. Several credit cards and driver's licenses under the same names. A cold sweat broke out on me. And then a memory surfaced from the depths of my mind. I am 8 years old. We are leaving Atlanta in the middle of the night. My parents say that Dad has problems with a business partner. We never went back there. I am 12 and we are moving again, changing schools in the middle of the year for better prospects. I am 17 and a random fire occurs in Dad's office, destroying all the documents right before an audit. But the most damning evidence was a notebook I found under a pile of papers. On the cover was written, "Exit Strategy." Inside was a detailed plan, which accounts to close, which assets to sell, and in what sequence. And on the last page was my name. And next to it, a note, $45K confirmed. Finalize operation after receiving funds. I wasn't just another one of their victims. I was the last one. The final chord in their long-running scam before they disappeared forever. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Quickly putting everything back in its place, I pretended to be on the phone when Mom peeked into the office. "Dinner is getting cold, dear. Is everything all right?" "Yes, Mom, just an urgent call from work," I lied, amazed at my own composure. "I'll just wash my hands and come." At the table, they talked about their upcoming business trip as if nothing was wrong. Not a word about Panama City, not a word about one-way tickets. "We'll manage your investment remotely for a couple of weeks," Dad explained. "And Mr. Peterson will handle all the business on site for now." "The timing is just perfect," Mom added. "With your contribution, we can immediately close the deal on that house on Hilton Head." Now, every word they said sounded like a code to me. Every smile, every word now seemed like part of a play they had been performing for years. Were these the same people who raised me? Or had I just never known the real them? And when can I meet the other investors? I asked as innocently as possible. "Maybe we can all get together before your trip." They exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance in which I read panic. "Oh, that will be difficult," Mom quickly found an answer. "Most of them live in other states and completely trust our judgment." At that moment, Dad's phone rang. He looked at the screen and stood up abruptly. "Excuse me, this is business." He went out onto the porch but didn't close the door tightly behind him, and I heard a fragment of his phrase, "We need to act immediately." She suspects something. He was talking about me. And in that second, the last remnants of my doubts vanished. My parents are fraudsters. And I am their next target. Mom continued to pour me wine, discussing trends in the real estate market. And I looked at her and couldn't reconcile this smiling woman with the one who once read me bedtime stories and assured me there were no monsters under the bed. Dad returned to the room. His face was calm, but his gaze was cold. "Let's finish with the formalities," he said. "It's getting late." The contract was placed on the table in front of me again. My entire life, built on love and trust for these people, was up against irrefutable evidence of their deceit. I could no longer pretend. "Before I sign anything," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling, "I want you to explain the structure of this business to me in detail." Mom laughed nervously. "Sweetie, we've discussed this 100 times. Your money is invested in real houses." "Which ones, exactly?" I pressed. "I need precise addresses, documents of ownership, and a recent appraisal of their value." The smile on Dad's face became hard. "All those details are in the documents. All that's required from you now is a signature and a check so we can reserve your share." "And the notary is waiting," Mom added. "Her time costs money." I took a deep breath. "Today, I checked the documents in the land registry. You have no property on Hilton Head or on Isle of Palms. The addresses you gave me belong to other people." The air in the room seemed to freeze. The smile on Mom's face turned into a grimace. There must be some mistake, Dad said cautiously. The property is registered to a legal entity. Which one, exactly? I asked. Michael Vance, Laura Chen, or David Sterling? Dad's phone rang. He went out into the hallway, and I heard his desperate whisper, "We have to leave. She knows everything." When he returned, it was no longer my father standing before me, but a cold, calculating stranger. "Who have you been talking to?" he demanded. "What difference does it make?" I replied. "The main thing is that I know you are going to take my money and fly to Panama City in 3 days." Mom cried out and dropped her glass. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth. "You've been going through his things." It wasn't a question, but an accusation. "It seems the apple doesn't fall far from the tree," I scoffed. "Turns out I'm good at a few things myself." Dad sank heavily into a chair. All masks were off. "You don't understand anything about how this world works," he said wearily. "Everyone is trying to cheat everyone. In this world, daughter, you are either a predator or prey," Dad continued in his usual, instructive tone. "We just figured that out earlier than others." "A predator?" My voice trembled. "You call cheating Mrs. Davis, who trusted you like her own son, predation? Or the Evanses, who considered you their best friends? You were going to do this to me? To your own daughter?" "We prefer the term high-risk investments," Mom remarked coldly. "No one forces people to invest money. They are driven by greed. We just give them what they want, the promise of easy money." "How long has this been going on?" I whispered. Dad leaned back in his chair. "About 25 years, I guess. Ever since my honest law practice failed. I learned the main lesson then: people don't want the truth. They want certainty. Show them pretty graphs, say smart words, and they will give you everything." And in that moment, I understood. All our moves. All those lost friends. All our vacations, my private school, clothes, food, all of it was paid for with someone else's sorrow. My life was built on the ruins of other people's lives. "And you wanted to do this to me," I repeated, no longer asking. "It's business," he cut in. "And you were the perfect target. Too trusting, too eager to please. It's not for nothing that we instilled in you since childhood that family is sacred. People who believe in that are very easy to control." Mom reached for me across the table, her gaze almost sympathetic. "Sweetie, don't think we would have abandoned you completely. We would have definitely sent you some money once we settled in a new place. We're not heartless." Their words broke the final dam. Tears streamed down, rewriting all 30 years of my life on the fly. The people who had comforted me after my divorce, I thought, were so happy for my successes. All this time they were con artists who built their well-being on the misfortunes of others. "It was all a lie," I breathed. "Every lesson you taught me about honesty, every family dinner." "Not everything," Mom objected, and for a moment, there was sincerity in her voice. "We love you, Barbara. Just in our own way." "Does your special way of loving include taking my money and running away?" Dad looked impatiently at his watch. "This scene is getting us nowhere. You're not investing, the conversation is over." "Oh no," I said, standing up. "The conversation is just beginning." His eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means I know the names. I know about the Millers, the Evanses, about Mrs. Davis. And I know about your tickets to Panama City. You wouldn't report your own parents." Panic entered Mom's voice. "Why not? You were going to fleece your own daughter." Dad stood up abruptly. "Think very carefully, Barbara, before you make your next move. Family doesn't turn on their own. You stopped being my family the second you made me your next target." I grabbed my purse and walked to the door. "Enjoy your dinner. It might be your last one in this house." Mom jumped up, her face contorted with panic. "Barbara, wait. We'll explain everything. You don't know the whole story. But I was already at the door. Through my tears, I heard my father's ice-cold voice behind me, "Let her go. That means we fly out tonight." I ran outside, got in my car, and somehow managed to drive to my house. Everything I had believed in had collapsed. The foundation of my life had turned to dust, leaving me alone in the middle of a reality where everything I knew about my family was a lie. I drove aimlessly through the wet streets of Charleston for a long time before pulling into an empty parking lot and calling Mr. Hayes. "I need to see you," I said through tears. "You were right. About everything." Half an hour later, I was sitting in his quiet, empty office. I told him everything I had found, about the fake passports, the list of deceived investors, the tickets to Panama City. I was supposed to be their last victim, I finished, feeling completely empty. They raised me for 30 years only to take everything at the end and disappear. Mr. Hayes listened very attentively. "Barbara, you must understand, this is not your fault. Con artists, even if they are your parents, are masters of manipulation. They build trust for years just to exploit it later." He opened his laptop. After our conversation, I checked a few things. Here are articles about similar scams in other states. The descriptions of the suspects strongly resemble your parents, just under different names. And here are the registrations of shell companies. I have already contacted Detective Miller from the Financial Crimes Unit. She believes your parents are part of a larger, organized network. In the morning, I met with Detective Miller. She was an experienced, composed woman who spoke calmly and to the point. "It seems your parents have been operating under the same scheme," she said, showing me a folder of documents. They would become part of a community, build a reputation there, and then offer people profitable investment projects. She showed me a list. 60 names. 60 families, many of whom were elderly people who had invested everything they had into these projects. "The problem is that many of them don't want to go to the police," the detective continued. "They are embarrassed to admit they were deceived. That's why you can help us move the case forward." The weight of responsibility fell on me. "If I help," I asked, "will these people have a chance to get their savings back?" "There is a chance," she replied. "We believe the main funds are held in foreign accounts. Your testimony will give us grounds for their arrest." That same day, I met with Eleanora Vance, one of those who had entrusted her savings to my parents. She was a 78-year-old retired nurse who, 2 years ago, had invested all the funds left to her after her husband's passing into their project, $120,000. Her voice trembled as she held her teacup. "Everything I had left. Your mother was so attentive to me during that difficult time. She helped with the paperwork, brought me food, said I was almost like family to her." Her story was painfully similar to mine. The same betrayal built on trust. The only difference was that I had my whole life ahead of me to fix things, while Mrs. Vance risked being left with nothing. Meeting her gave me strength. I realized I had to act not just for myself. "What do you need from me?" I asked Detective Miller when we met again. "We need a recorded conversation," she replied, "in which they admit the nature of their scheme." "Your parents are very cunning," Detective Miller said. "They always act in a way that leaves no direct evidence. But a conversation with you, they might let their guard down and say too much." "You're suggesting I record them?" The thought of meeting them again brought on a panic attack. "It's the most reliable way to get evidence," she confirmed. "The plan is this: you call them, tell them you've changed your mind, and ask them to explain all the details of their business to you again." "Barbara, you don't have to do this," Mr. Hayes intervened. "We can go another way." But I already knew I had to do it. "I will meet with them tomorrow evening. Before their flight." That night, Detective Miller and her technician taught me how to use a recording device disguised as a regular phone. We developed a cover story. I would tell my parents that I wanted to not just invest money, but to join their business, so they could share their experience. "Ask specific questions," the detective advised. "How they find investors, how they transfer money, where they get fake documents. The more details, the better. I spent that night in a hotel again. I couldn't go back home, where photos of my, as it turned out, fictional family looked down at me from the walls. I spent a sleepless night trying to accept the new reality. The people who taught me to be honest were not at all who I thought they were. By morning, I had made a firm decision. My duty was not to them, but to those who had suffered from their actions, people like Mrs. Vance. When Detective Miller arrived in the morning, I was calm and collected. "We'll be in contact every second," she said, setting up the recording device. "If you feel the slightest danger, just say the code phrase, 'I need time to think it over,' and we'll intervene immediately." Mr. Hayes, who was going to be in the van with the detectives, gave me one last piece of advice. "Remember, your goal is not to argue with them," he said. "It's to give them an opportunity to talk. Ask questions, show curiosity." On the way to my parents' house, I felt a change happening inside me. I was going there as an instrument of justice. The girl they had raised to be obedient was, today, to become the cause of their downfall. When I entered, the suitcases were already in the hallway. They were ready for their business trip to Panama City. "Barbara," Mom said, surprised. "We weren't expecting you today." "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," I said, feeling my heart pound loudly. "Can we talk?" "About what?" Dad asked cautiously. "About your business." "About everything," I looked him straight in the eye. "It seems I was too harsh yesterday." They exchanged glances, and Mom stepped aside to let me in. "Of course, sweetie. Come in." The living room was in disarray, pictures were gone from the walls, cabinet doors were ajar. They were preparing to flee. "I realized something," I said, sitting on the edge of the sofa. "You've been doing this for 25 years. That means it's a very profitable business." "What are you getting at?" Dad crossed his arms over his chest. "I'm thinking that maybe I'm in the wrong line of work. Marketing is fine, of course, but not as profitable as what you do. Maybe I should not just invest money, but learn the family trade from you." The shock on their faces was almost comical. You want to join us?" Mom asked in disbelief. "Why not? You yourselves taught me that in this world, it's every man for himself. You've obviously perfected this system." Every word was difficult for me, but I tried to make my voice sound admiring. Dad sat down, studying me with new interest. "What made you change your mind?" "I realized you were right. I've spent my whole life trying to be honest, to play by the rules. And where has it gotten me? At 30, I'm divorced and starting from scratch. And you are thriving." Their suspicion began to melt away. The prospect of not only getting my money but also welcoming their daughter back into the family obviously appealed to them. "It's not an easy path," Dad said, testing me. "Constant moving, new names, living in perpetual tension. But, apparently, the game is worth the candle." I glanced around their living room. "Besides, the three of us can achieve more." Mom sat down next to me and took my hand. "Are you sure, sweetie? Once you cross this line, you can never go back to a normal life." "I am your daughter, after all," I replied, struggling to suppress my disgust. "So teach me. Tell me everything. From the very beginning." For the next hour, with frightening pride, they initiated me into the details of their craft. Dad explained how they chose their hunting grounds, small, tight-knit communities where everyone trusted each other. "Church congregations are a goldmine," he said. "You just have to convince the pastor and a couple of elders, and everyone else will bring you their money themselves." Mom, in turn, talked about how they built their reputation, joining local clubs, making small donations to charity, befriending the right people. "We always start with something real," she shared her secret. "David really did work as a consultant, and I sold houses. People believe what they can verify. Those licenses were our main trump card." They described how they chose their victims, recently widowed women, retirees, busy professionals, all those who had money but lacked the time or knowledge to vet their investments. The main thing is that they ask you to take their money themselves. Dad shared his experience. They described in detail how they gradually moved the funds to foreign accounts and disappeared just as investors began to have their first suspicions. We usually work in one city for 4 to 5 years, Mom explained. That's enough to gain trust, but not too long to arouse suspicion. I asked clarifying questions, pulling details of past schemes from them, and every word they said was being recorded and transmitted to Detective Miller's van. What about the Millers? Or Mrs. Davis? I asked. Miller started asking too many questions about the property documents, Dad replied without a hint of remorse. We had to leave Atlanta a couple of months ahead of schedule. And that fire in your office? Dad smirked. Killed 2 birds with 1 stone. Got rid of the paperwork and got a hefty sum from the insurance. When I realized the detectives had enough material, I gave the prearranged signal. Yes, I said, it seems you have a very busy schedule. And when were you going to tell me about Panama City? I asked. After we got settled, Mom replied. We would have sent you money. Or even invited you to join us. Family discount, Dad shrugged. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Are you expecting someone? Mom frowned. Yes, I said, standing up. It was beginning to dawn on them. I decided to invite my business partners. They're very interested in your strategies. Detective Miller and 4 other officers entered the room. Helen and David Reed, you are under arrest on suspicion of fraud, document forgery, and embezzlement in a particularly large amount. The transformation of my parents was instantaneous. Mom burst into tears, and a mask of icy contempt froze on Dad's face. You were recording us, he hissed as an officer snapped handcuffs on his wrists. Your own parents. I learned from the best, I replied, my voice trembling. Family is above all, isn't it? As they were being led away, Mom turned around. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. Barbara, please. We'll explain everything. But I knew that no explanations would change anything now. I watched in silence as the police cars drove away 2 strangers who had raised me. The aftermath was staggering. The local media latched onto the story. Pillars of society turn out to be serial scammers. Exposed by their own daughter. People's reactions varied. Some called me a hero. Others, a traitor. The comments online were full of both support and condemnation. Family friends were divided. Those who lost money thanked me for my courage, while others believed I shouldn't have aired the family's dirty laundry. The legal process proceeded at its own, unhurried pace. My parents hired the best lawyers, who tried to portray their actions as unfortunate but legal business decisions. I, on the other hand, testified before a grand jury, providing the very conversation recorded in their living room and all the documents I had found. Testifying against my own parents was the most difficult trial of my life. How could you do this to the people who raised you? My father's lawyer asked me during cross-examination, trying to paint me as vengeful. You should ask my parents that question, I answered calmly. They were the ones who were going to take my savings and disappear from my life forever. Ultimately, thanks to my testimony, the prosecutors managed to find and freeze their accounts totaling about $3 million. It was only a small part of what they had managed to accumulate over the years, but it was enough to start paying compensation to the latest victims. 2 months after their arrest, I visited them in the county jail. We spoke through thick glass over a telephone. Why are you here? Dad asked without any warmth in his voice. I want to understand, I replied. Was anything in my life real? Or was I just a part of your plan from childhood? We love you, Barbara, Mom leaned forward. That was always real. We just have different views on life. You were going to take my money, I reminded her. You shouldn't mix business with family, Dad interrupted. We would have compensated you for everything in time. Even now, facing the consequences, they continued to lie. You taught me that nothing is more important than honesty. I stood up to leave. Perhaps that's the only lesson I can thank you for. Even if you never believed in it yourselves. When we get out, we'll start all over. All together. Dad shouted after me. His words only confirmed what I already knew. They would never change. For them, deceit wasn't just a job. It was their essence. And I needed to build my life as far away from them as possible. A year passed. I changed jobs and moved to Philadelphia to start with a clean slate. My townhouse in Charleston was sold, cutting another thread that tied me to the past. The new city gave me anonymity and a chance to escape the gossip that hadn't subsided since my parents' arrest. The trial was over. They were found guilty on several counts. Dad got 14 years, Mom got 9. The court also ordered them to pay compensation to all the victims, although I knew that most of them would likely never see their money. My own path to healing began with psychotherapy. My therapist, Dr. Marshall, helped me understand that grieving for living people can be much harder than for those who are gone. You are mourning not your parents, but the illusion you lived in, she told me. But the hardest part was dealing with the anger. I was angry not only at them for their lies but also at myself for my years of blindness. What if I had understood everything earlier? I often asked my therapist. Maybe I could have saved so many people from financial loss? You were a child who was taught to trust, she always replied. It was not your responsibility to recognize the dishonest actions of your parents. Gradually, I found a way to channel my experience into something positive. I started working for an organization that helps people in difficult financial situations. Over time, I even joined its board of directors. We launched a separate program to support the relatives of those who have committed financial crimes, because these people, like me, face the consequences of others' mistakes. My marketing experience proved very useful in creating educational programs. I spoke to people, telling them how to recognize warning signs in financial offers. People who want to mislead you are counting on your politeness, I would say. They hope you won't ask uncomfortable questions. Being persistent may be uncomfortable, but it will protect your future. Of all the people affected by my parents' actions, I was most afraid to call Eleanora Vance. I dialed her number with a heavy heart, prepared for anger and accusations. But instead, I heard a quiet, tired voice. I introduced myself, and she was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Child, it's not your fault." And so our friendship began. We started meeting every week. Over a cup of tea, we talked not only about the trial and money. She told me about her husband, her work as a nurse, her daughter in Australia. And I, for the first time in a long time, could talk about my feelings without fear of judgment. She became the grandmother I never had. When I started giving lectures on financial security, she came to support me. And then she took the stage herself. Her story, told in simple, honest language, had a stronger effect on people than any statistics or presentations. She showed by her example that anyone can be deceived, and there is no shame in it. We learned to enjoy the little things. When she was allocated a new apartment in a retirement home, we celebrated by buying her a beautiful potted flower. When I got a promotion, she baked her signature apple pie. And when that first check for $3,000 arrived, we didn't talk about how little it was. We just went to a cafe and ordered the most expensive dessert on the menu. You know, she told me that day, your parents took away the peaceful retirement I dreamed of. But they gave me you. And a new reason to fight. And, in my opinion, that is a much more valuable acquisition. It was in Philadelphia that I began to learn to trust people again. I made new acquaintances slowly, cautiously, but sincerely. One of these acquaintances was Michael, a graphic designer with whom I volunteered at a local animal shelter. When I finally gathered the courage to tell him my story, he didn't pity me. He simply said, "That has definitely left its mark on you. But it doesn't define who you are." 6 months later, when my relationship with Michael became truly close, I received a letter from my mother. It contained everything: memories of my childhood, assurances of love, and, between the lines, a cunning manipulation. She wrote that I could help them with early release if I gave testimony about their positive parental qualities. Michael found me in the kitchen in tears. She still sees me as her target, I explained. And what are you going to do? He asked, not giving advice, but just being there. I thought for a long time, and then I wrote a reply. A short one. I am building my life on honesty and genuine intimacy. When you are ready to speak to me in that language, without attempts at manipulation, I will be ready to listen. Until then, I wish you to find the strength for healing and self-reflection. That was our last contact. My father never wrote to me. On the second anniversary of my parents' arrest, I was sitting in a quiet cafe in Philadelphia. Mrs. Vance had already called me in the morning just to ask how I was doing. Michael sent a funny postcard. Colleagues from the foundation flooded me with messages of support. At that moment, I understood with particular clarity that over the past 2 years, I had found a new, real family. A family I had chosen myself. Now, when I speak in our support group, I often talk about this. About how family is not just an entry on a birth certificate. It's the people who rejoice in your successes, not envy them. Who comfort you, not use your pain. Who prove their love not with words, but with daily actions. The main lesson I learned was painful but liberating. Loyalty to the truth is always more important than blind loyalty to blood ties. I no longer blame myself for that call to the police. My parents put me in a position where I had to choose between their deceit and the well-being of dozens of innocent people. I chose the people. That evening, I made an entry in my journal. The greatest freedom is having nothing to hide. It is the ability to build your life on a solid foundation of truth, not on the fragile sand of beautiful illusions. That perfect image of a family I had clung to for so long was just a beautiful but empty picture. My real life, sometimes difficult, but always honest, has become the foundation for something much more real. Of course, there are difficult days. Holidays still remind me of what I no longer have. Certain smells or melodies bring back happy moments from childhood that are now forever poisoned by the knowledge of the truth. But over time, bitterness gives way to peace. I realize that, despite everything, my parents taught me several invaluable lessons: resilience, empathy for victims, and an unwavering belief in honesty. We don't choose where we start our journey, I told Michael as we decorated our first Christmas tree together. But we do choose what to take with us on the road and what to leave behind. My parents chose the path of deceit. I choose the path of openness. They valued profit over people. I value honesty in relationships. They saw vulnerability in others as an opportunity for gain. I see it as the basis for real trust. And every day, I lay another brick in the foundation of my new life. A life where promises are kept, trust is not betrayed, and love is real. The deceit that almost broke me eventually became the cause of my rebirth. It led me to a life far more full and real than the one I had. Have you ever had to pick up the pieces after someone close to you destroyed your trust? Where did you find the strength to start over? Share your story in the comments. If my story resonated with you, subscribe so you don't miss new stories of resilience and healing. And remember, your value is not determined by how others treat you, but by how you, with honor and dignity, get through these trials. Thank you for listening.